Welcome everyone to the Risk and Assurance Committee meeting on the 11th of December. We have our chair who is actually away prior commitment, but online with us, Andrew Gibbs, online. So I'm going to be acting chair for the day. I'm going to ask Worship.
Mōre tātou, we'll just use our usual karakia this morning. Whakatakati hau ki te uru, whakatakati hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai. E hi aki ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, ti hei, mauri ora.
Thank you. We have no apologies today. It's all good. Declarations of conflict of interest. No changes. Orders. Second, and Councillor Byrne. All in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Confirmation of minutes. Confirmation minutes of 15th of October 2024. We'll move in a second for those. Councillor Byrne, Mr. Timmer. Everybody say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Against, carried. Members arising from those minutes. Page 14. Section, resolution and action monitoring report.
I'll take this one for you, Mr. Chair.
Oh, well, it was duct tape.
Yeah, all good. Good morning, everybody. Look, so two resolutions that are sitting there. Obviously, insurance. We've got an insurance update today, and in that report, Mr. Chamber will give an update on loss modelling. Probably just noting in the actions, there are quite a number of actions in that section. The one action that is read that we've just recommended some guidance on really is the review of the Treasury Management Policy, and yeah, that's an outstanding one now for over a year, which looks to review what was the property investment section of the Treasury Management Policy. Our recommendation at this stage is that it's closed with no further action, just recognising December 23 was a different period of time when we did have funding that was potentially going to go into investment property. So look, again, resourcing into it, we can put it into the work program, but at this stage, it's just whether or not it still remains a really notable priority for action to be taken. So other than that, comfortable that we're on track with everything. So yeah, haven't taken any feedback on that one if it's still seen as a priority.
Question 3, Chair, about the Treasury Management Policy. When does that get reviewed? It's every triennium. It must be up for review at some point anyway.
Mr. Chair, was last reviewed earlier this year with some support from being called in March, I think it was. So
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Tate. I actually would like to see that resolution be passed to the Finance Committee. I think there is a piece here about what the forward-looking strategy of the whole governance table is. We're actually, I think, by sitting at this table for 12 months has probably not prompted the right discussions, which is actually about council strategy. So I would request that we actually pass that back to the chair of the Finance and Infrastructure Committee to see whether we could re-scope with councillors on what it would be that we would want to achieve by doing that piece of work, and that would then allow us to decide whether we that tends to be where it gets raised about divesting properties and things like that.
we talked about rental properties.
And not previously, not as an investment. So we don't charge market rental. We don't treat them as investment activities. Not a community. But it could do into the future if that's the direction you chose to take.
Gee, that's why I think it needs to go back for a council. Because I actually think these councillors are probably slightly different. Right, I just had one other on the carbon credit trading policy action about identifying a subject matter expert. And just wondered whether Hastings and Napier have a policy or a strategy or an expert, or how are they dealing with it? Is that a logical place to look?
Yeah, so I can't answer definitively for Napier, but I can tell you that I have spoken to my counterpart in Hastings and they just rely on broker advice. They don't have a formal policy on how to buy carbon credits.
Thank you.
Recommendation is that the Risk and Assurance Committee notes the resolution and action monitoring report. Councillor Bloom.
Right.
Harry. Next item is risk status report. Thank you.
Good morning to the chair and committee. Before you, I've got the regular report, the risk status report, which comes to the Risk and Insurance Committee. Recently, we've done a bit of work in this space. We have reviewed the top risks, and then with council a week or two ago, we did a review of the risk appetite settings, and thank you, Mr. Gibbs was also involved in that session, which was really helpful. Off the back of that session with council, there were some recommendations for some changes in terms of either the titles, adding new risks, taking some off, because it was within a short period of time before the reports were due for this. Any of the minor changes that were less complex, I've included them in the report, the ones that were fairly straightforward. And there were a couple of other bigger requests which require some time for LT to work through. So not everything we talked about is in this report. That's probably the key message from me today. But you will notice some of the changes that we've made off the back of that conversation. So going into the actual risk register update itself, in the first section under Proud District, you'll notice now that there is included the risk to delivery in the water and roading infrastructure there, and we would like to have a further conversation just about that risk appetite setting in today's workshop item. The next one in Prosperous District, we've just had a title update, but the commentary there is largely unchanged from where we'd seen previously. Probably the only update is that we obviously have the new draft annual plan numbers, and that's going to workshop with council tomorrow, actually, to talk about the annual plan. In Strong Communities, not much of an update there. I think that's the same since the last report. In Connected Citizens, probably the ones that have changed are around cybersecurity. So there is an update to the cybersecurity risk for us in that the implementation plan has been accelerated. It's in its final stages and due to be completed within January. There's a note here saying that we've got a scheduled cybersecurity event for January. I think that will actually be a bit later in the first quarter. And that is a full planned IMT for cybersecurity. We've had a couple of events this year and we're doing a run through in the first quarter. And also probably of note is that we're due for another audit of our cybersecurity posture, and any recommendations or outcomes from that will come back to the committee as part of our regular reporting just on cybersecurity itself. The new one that had been added in below it was a result of the workshop with council where we'd separated out the risk to our drinking water systems. as a result of a cybersecurity event. So that's now been included. The actions that are in there are actually as a result of the cybersecurity events that we had earlier in the year. So the main bit for you guys to be aware of that there's a work program specifically involved with that. One is segregation of the SCADA networks, so separating the water systems off our server, so giving some resilience there. And Mr. Swinburne also has a work program which is called an operational technology assessment, which is already underway. So there's quite a bit of work that's already being done in that area, but now included in the report. So visibility for the committee. And then if I just jump through the last one, probably to talk about in the durable infrastructure, you'll see that we've included specifically the roading infrastructure as a risk, a failure of the critical roading infrastructure. And then the other two, there are no changes this quarter. However, the failure of drinking water reservoirs and the workshop item today will be talking through the gap analysis of the controls. So that's some of the work that I've been doing with the exec team and some of our risk owners, which I've previously had some time with Mr. Gibson. So you'll see that today later in workshop.
Question.
Thank you very much, Nick. And I do apologise that I wasn't available for the risk workshop. Doug had mentioned it to me, but unfortunately I had been in hospital for some surgery and probably wasn't appropriate that I came here and talk to you at the time. So I apologise for that. I've got quite a few questions on the risk register, and I think it'd be better I had a chat with you offline on it. It's just there's a whole host of questions I've got, and I don't really want to put them through it all. And they're probably easily answered anyway. So if we could meet up at a later date, I can talk to you on the phone, that would be wonderful. Cheers.
Thank you, and nice to see some of those changes come straight through. Thank you for that. That was awesome. The one that for me was actually in the failure of critical roading infrastructure, which is page 23 of the agenda. Just in the description of the event that talks about, for example, and names 3 bridges or 2 bridges and a piece of road. So will that now actually go through, through the asset management plan and actually identify which they are and actually bullet point them rather than just talking about examples? I'm guessing that's probably the next stages.
So through the chair, you're crystal ball gazing because I was anticipating that question. There is a whole host of work that the land transport team does, and they have their hierarchy of, I'm not going to use the right words here, but the most critical assets and infrastructure. And at any given time that may change because something might have happened. I've just put some examples in here because those are the locations that I know have come up previously in conversation. However, they're not the only ones and they're not in the highest priority to lowest priority order. That's something at an operational level, which Mr. George manages with the land transport team. Would it be more useful
maybe a
to
note?
take them out?
No, not necessarily, but maybe in the narrative to actually just add a sentence that says identified as a new risk and a rigorous look through the AMP to identify the highest risk pieces is happening, something like that.
Through Mr. Chair, I think we've got a couple of workshop sessions this afternoon. So one being the deep dive into the controls for the waters. And again, as we start to get through things like land transport, I think that's an important kind of look back around how that maturity around risk is continuing to grow, which I think which will answer some of those more detailed questions when we actually get to doing the detailed kind of controls of what's in place, what's not in place, which will then lead nicely into, again, kind of that internal audit conversation about, assessing the effectiveness of the controls that actually may be in place or may not be in place as well. So you can sort of it feels like the system's starting to get a bit more connected across the pieces. So looking forward to those couple of sessions and workshop as well. So.
My question relates to the Waipawa and Whangaho communities are not adequately protected during future rain events. And it just talks about good communications to community about what has been completed and what remains to be done. And I'm not sure whether that falls to us. That is really up to the regional council. I'm just wondering whether we advocate for at-risk communities rather than be responsible for the communication to that community. I don't know. Just when I look at the controls, I see them as controls that we can control, whereas we can't control good communication from HBRC. Well, I don't know. To me.
And through you, Mr. I think there's still an opportunity, just recognising the moment in time where these are, there's still further work for us to do. And that yet we've got legislative responsibilities as a civil defence function as well. So there's also a combined duty between us and both HBRC in terms of everything like preparatory. So again, it's just a challenge for us all is when we start digging into these risks, there's lots more work for us all, and it's just how do we where do we choose to put the right priorities? Right focus on those priorities, I should say.
I quite like that conversation. Because actually, if there was one thing that I feel would help with that risk to be prepared for, because we don't control the rest of that stuff, is that we're prepared with a better plan about how to provide the escalating warnings going into those communities. So Parongaho got no warnings and Waipawa got very late warnings. And so we don't control all of the information, but if we've got a better plan of how we might do that to recognise the risk, and Onga Onga's this the other one who has got no flood protection either. And if we've got particular plans about that, those things, so to recognise there's a higher risk, then that's the one thing we can control. So that's point probably number 2, I think. Number 2. Thanks.
And then I just had another question about water security, and we talk about the cyber security of our water. So I'm just wondering, what sort of security do we have in place to ensure that we've got nobody in St George Bay that would look at contaminating our water systems? But what security do we have in place for that? Stop someone attacking our water, drinking water, putting our people at risk.
So through the chair, I know of 2 things, but I'll let Mr. Kinvick add to these as well. So the first part, I'm going to talk about systems based and then actually physically, so that I think that there's 2 ways that that can be made more secure, because one of that is part of the SCADA, the technology assessment. So we do have the ability to remotely control like the chlorination, for example, as part of the water treatment system. So that is covered in the work program that Mr. Swinburne is leading out to add additional security from a system point of view. And then the other side is physical at the treatment plant and the security measures that are taken in that regard at the actual infrastructure itself. Would you like to add anything, Mr. Kinvick?
Yeah, the normal way of protecting a reservoir, for example, would be alarms on the covers. I'm not sure whether they've actually got alarms. I will find out, and then we'll add it to the level of controls. That's a really good point.
No more questions.
I had a question. I sent an email in about emerging risk, but we're having a session later on it, so maybe we can discuss it at that point.
Any questions? So the recommendation is that the Risk and Assurance Committee notes the risk status report. Move to the second one. Worship. Say aye. That's carried. Treasury Management Monitoring Report, Mr. Chamberlain.
Good morning, councillors and your worship. So this morning, this is just a standard report that we bring to this table every quarter, updating how we're going against our treasury policy. We actually have Bancorp coming to present later in workshop, so rather than repeat a lot of what they're going to say later, I'll just give you the real highlights. So far this year, council has refinanced and drawn some additional debt. So our debt has increased by 4 million since June. We've undertaken a number of interest rate swaps, 25 million of those, and you can see those listed there. These have been undertaken as the markets react to the Reserve Bank moves, and you can see that we've got some quite favourable rates here, averaging 3.73%. On the top of page 26, you can see what the different swap rates were just prior to the latest OCR announcement. And essentially, anything that's in sort of shaded red is considered to be attractive, going through to green, which is considered cool and less attractive. So it's all that short end interest rate swaps in the sort of 1 to sort of 4 year period, which is the ones that we've been undertaking. Another view of that is on page 29. There's an interest rate yield curve that you can see is basically what the markets are picking the floating rate to be. And you can see that currently the floating rate is still up around 5.25%, but they expect that to drop quite quickly and sort of settle down at the sort of 3.75% and then start going up the further out you go. So again, it's that attractive period at the bottom of that chart that we're aiming for in terms of doing the swaps. Again, on page 29 is a list of the different sort of compliance policies that we have. So that's things like liquidity, cost of financing, debt to income, and we're compliant with all of those. And last but not least, on page 30, there's a bit of commentary there on the latest OCR announcement, which came out on the 27th of October, so only a couple of weeks ago. There, the Reserve Bank dropped the OCR 0.5% down to 4.25. So that makes a total drop of 1.25% over the last 3 reviews. And there's a bit of commentary that I've copied there from the statement, but essentially the Reserve Bank is happy that they're back inside their inflationary target of 1 to 3%, and they are forecasting further easing in the beginning of 2025. So that's probably the highlights. As I say, Bancorp will be here and we'll be going through debt graphs, debt profiles, interest rate markets in more detail later in the meeting. So, but happy to take any questions if you've got some now.
A couple of questions. You said it as the 31st of October, council holding 11.6 million funds on call. Seems to be quite a lot of money on call. Are we making a positive turn on that, or is that negative?
Yeah, so that was actually, there was a little bit on term deposit and a little bit sitting in a call account. The call account, I think I would have to double check, but I think is paying about 2.5% interest at the moment. And the term deposit was a 90-day one that matures in December to get the better return.
So we're making a positive return on that vis-a-vis the money we borrowed. Is it pre-funding?
It's not covering our average cost of funds in terms of borrowing, because that's still around sort of 4.5%, 5%. So there is a small loss on that. But essentially the money that we got is from our quarterly rates revenue. And obviously we spend that over the next 3 months. So just happens to be timing in terms of what we've got. Yeah.
The other question I had was, council has no other investments other than LGFA bonds. I couldn't quite get my head around that terminology. Do we have borrower notes?
Well, that's what the LGFA bonds were.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's right. I just do it.
Might just be the terminology of what I was using.
So we don't report on the borrower notes? I don't see them in this report. I missed it.
We previously had them in there.
Yeah, I thought you did.
And you suggested we took them out, so
Okay.
because they weren't.
Was that what I said? Was it- Well, we've got one amount. That's right. I just got confused as to the bonds and the notes. So I didn't know the terminology. Okay. So we've answered some few questions there, which is good.
Yeah, so
Because they're not much.
council doesn't have any, what I would call true investments where we're investing for the returns. The LGFA bonds that you're referring to are a requirement that we hold that are linked back to our borrowing. So for every borrowing we have to do, we have to hold a certain percentage in these borrower notes.
So if we call them borrower notes, that would be good.
Sure.
I just, Mike, it's one of the reasons why a piece of work that came up in the resolution monitoring about investment policy settings needed to come up, because for the last few years, we've had a go-round conversation, which has not gone anywhere, about what we potentially could do with other investments. So we've got a couple of reserves, for instance, that are sitting there as kind of like a community-based reserves. There's just under $1 million on an award fund, for instance. And what is the best way for us to invest in that? We've looked, attempted to look at other ways to invest that to get a better return into that community fund. But the policy settings and the treasury management don't allow us to invest in places that don't meet the metrics that sit in the quality of borrowers that we're allowed to go to in this treasury management policy. So we've had this go round in a circle of, we want to do something that's more productive with the options we do have with cash on hand to do something with. But the policy settings don't really allow us to take any risk because we haven't reviewed the policy. And so we just go back to the beginning and then we say we can't review the treasury policy around investment. So we actually have to find the way to break that circuit to allow us to do that, because otherwise council comes up with a new initiative and then the treasury management policy says, well, you can't because you'll break policy.
Yep.
So there's a piece here where we haven't held a lot of property, we haven't held a lot of cash and other investments. So it's meant we haven't had the maturity in the business of how to deal with that stuff. So when councillors raise it, the business doesn't really have the ability to deal with it. So there's a little bit of work required there about how we might break that linking.
Okay. It's a strategic view from the council on what
Yes.
to do.
Yes.
And do you borrow money and create a fund? Because that's effectively what up is, because at the moment you're just netting everything off and it's reducing your cost of debt. That's using our cost of debt. That's all we're doing.
Yeah.
So you bang on there.
Yeah.
So while we've got this paper reserve that says it's got $1 million in it, essentially we've used that for internal borrowing.
Yes.
So to
offset.
convert it into a true investment, you would need to switch that to an external borrowing. So your return would have to be at a rate higher than your mortgage rate.
But the policy settings don't allow to invest that cash into something. I can't remember what the levels are in terms of the security settings for that, what you can invest in to do that. So it's that risk profile of what we accept that we could invest money to change.
So there's two ways to do it. You either invest in some securities or other investments that have got a higher risk than what's in the treasury policy, or you take a position like if interest rates coming off, then maybe that was an opportunity to buy some longer dated securities, and then with the hope that the interest rates will come off. But then again, that's speculating, and does council want to be in that area?
Yes, and that's exactly the right question about in that that speculating space about how you get the right balance, and that's a conversation we haven't been able to break the deadlock on.
Yeah, and there's been other councils that have been trying to do this. I think Kapiti was one of them that got quite some negative publicity in the media because of what they were doing. They were borrowing money and then investing it in funds and stuff, and it didn't go down very well. And maybe that's a question to talk to Bancorp today, see what their view is on it. But having reserves and other investments is quite a good thing, because when you have a like we've had with the cyclone and a few things, you have a big event, they're quite useful to hang on to or to liquidate. But then again, you've got ability through your bank, and the LGFA is pretty likely to stand there and fund you no matter how bad things get. So I think on balance, probably what we're doing is probably the right thing.
Mr. Gibbs.
Hi, just a quick observation on top of page 30 there, Brent. It's just around you mentioned the operating revenue is inflated because of the subsidies we've got from central agencies. And I was just wondering if we might want to normalise those ratios, take that out basically, and just see what they say.
I periodically do that calculation, just to make sure we're inside policy. So while the ratio on page 29 says that we're 65% debt to revenue, if we took the Waka Kotahi out from memory, we are sitting around 90. So we're still well inside the compliance. But I can add that if you would like to see that every meeting.
Well, as long as you're doing it, just comfort just to make sure that we're, because at the end of the day, we're looking at that longitudinal position, aren't we? So,
Because at some point, those additional subsidies will disappear and that'll change our ratio. So
and we complete. Well, it's probably best then to explain it when those come off, then, because they'll wash themselves through, won't they, in the next couple of years?
correct.
Yep. Thank you.
Any other questions? So recommendation that the Risk and Insurance Committee notes the Treasury Management Monitoring Report. Second for that. Timmer, Mr. Timmer, in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Health and Safety Report. Spacefield, Mr. Lennon.
Good morning again to the chair and committee. I'm here just to give a quick intro in place of Mrs. Martin, who's away today, but we'll quite happily hand over to Ms. Annan to answer any questions. But look, in front of you, there is the regular report on health and safety from the business. It is largely just a routine update covered in this report. Probably the only key bit to point out is that Ms. Annan is currently organising for an external audit to be done. We're due for another. So you'll recall we've had the gap analysis project, we had the original baseline, we did a desktop review, we're due for another. That'll help us reprioritise and the work program be developed off the back of that to make sure either we have everything covered or B, are we doing it in the right order based on priority. So happy to take any questions or pass over to Ms. Anand.
No. Through the chair, as Nick said, that is scheduled to be undertaken in in March, with impact again. Also just to highlight that, moving forward, one thing the health and safety team wants to do is to get a more balanced scorecard with our reporting, and in order to do that, we're looking at having already developed the contractor minimum critical risk standards, is actually going out and with the contractor and actually auditing against that, just to make sure that that what they say they're actually doing, and doing that in partnership with them. So that is in progress, and that will be done in the first 3 months of next year. So that is being developed at the moment, and that will give us some really good lead indicators and help us understand better the work that is done, but also having that really good collaboration that we've already got with our contractors, but developing that further as we go through the journey. With the service delivery meeting that we had recently, we discussed the importance of reporting all events with the contractors. And, you know, the key message was kia hamaru te ora, together we live safely. And that was well received. And we've actually since then, we're hoping that we will see some improvement in the reporting that has come across. And just this month, I have actually noticed that in the reports that I have received from November, And we've also had an increase in the number of contractors wanting to join that meeting. And that was really significant, being part of that meeting as we go forward with those contractors, which is such a big part of what we do. More questions?
Mr. Timmer.
I had a question on page 36, which is for of the report, that table that's in there. I'm just wondering how on the right-hand side, it doesn't seem to be any completion over there. We seem to be working down the table in terms of getting things done, and it looks like we go down and then down, and then the other stuff hasn't been on the right. Can you just explain to me when we're going to be filling out the right side of the table?
So this is the critical risk table.
Yeah.
Yeah. So at the moment, we've been doing it. It's been a bit of like a plan, do, study, act approach. So we develop the critical risks, and then they will go to ELT for approval and adoption, that we've got the right controls in place. There's lots of work that's happening around the outskirts of that. We haven't got it right the very first time, so we're about to present back to ELT in next week with the revised critical risk standard. That one will hopefully, we will get that across the line, and then we will be able to fill these other boxes out. It's an ongoing process. We're not going to be able to put one out and then have that accepted and have it completed. It's actually going to be work in process, because we actually need to look at it and think, okay, have we got the right things? Every time we have an event happen, we review that critical risk alongside and we make tweaks. So I think that's a really, really good approach to take, to make sure that it is bespoke and that it's actually fit for purpose. And that will go on throughout the program. It'll be about a 2-year program. And that's why now that we're going to go out and do the audits against those other, those contractors' critical risk standards, that will keep us in balance and make sure that our procedures and processes are right. And also throughout this process, in testing it, we've been able to see what's actually missing. Are there things that are missing that, like a risk assessment, have actually we got one that supports this work? And so that's been really good through this process. It's actually quite a big a framework.
Maybe just a bit of context view. So for us as the organisation, in terms of size, it's just Michelle that drives the body of work, and probably where, and obviously we've got a bit of external support from Impact and others, but it's kind of that 2-year journey we talk about. It's probably even the level of maturity of what we've achieved to date far exceeds anything we've had previously. So confident that we're heading in the right direction, and the best to take the time and have the right conversations as we go through.
I've seen it. Just wondering what you're pointing up that way. Mr. Gibbs.
Hey, I'm just continuing with the optics. I think Michael's talking about the right-hand side of the table. I think I assume we can get assurance from, just picking on working at heights as one example on that table. We're still working at heights in our day-to-day business, aren't we? And so we have systems and processes in place to support those people working at heights. We're just going through this review process to improve and whatever we're doing in terms of ensuring that we have better practice, but we have practices in place now. People are working at heights safely. There is probably a business owner. So I was just wondering, I suppose it's the optics, what the table tells you versus what we're currently doing and what you're planning to do. I suppose that's because I think what you're saying here is we're comfortable to work safely today. What we're doing is improving and enhancing, et cetera, aren't we? That's what you're telling us, aren't you?
Through the chair, yes. Yep, correct. The other thing is that just making sure that, with, if there's any legislative changes that come up or improvements to practice, one thing we are doing is I'm working very closely with our host councils to look at their processes and their systems and processes, so that we're getting consistency, especially when we have contractors that we sometimes use the same contractors, so that we've got consistency and we're working at that best practice.
And through the chair, I'll just add that Mr. Gibbs' comments, we have, from Mr. Timmer, we have had them previously, and there is a note that attempts to recognise that at the bottom of the table. Where there is a note there saying that even though it says not started, there's many of the controls that we already have in place, and they're just getting formalised into the critical risk standard work. So I know we've had this discussion previously, so that note attempts to address that topic.
Lights on.
Yeah. I don't want people to go away thinking we've got no systems and processes in place for our critical risks. That's all I want. Sure.
And through the chair, whenever we do have an event that links to one of our critical risks, that's where we actually note this in here, and we can look and say, what went well and what perhaps didn't go so well that we need to build around. There's lots of sort of moving parts within this, but I'm confident that we're on the right track and that we're heading in the right direction.
So on that topic, remind me, I think this is there, but I can't remember. So the reports, you talk about 13 events reported by council officers in the executive summary. So every event is reported to ELT, and every event is being reported here too. What is the criteria for that escalation? Or is it just we're reporting everything?
So through the chair, the difference between what ELT sees and what the risk insurance sees is the amount of detail. So in our ELT meetings, we have the full report that gets reported out of risk manager. So we see all of the detail of the events and we discuss that in the ELT meeting. It's a rolled up version that comes to the risk and assurance committee. Probably the difference being if there's a notifiable event that might be specifically described in the RNA report. And then Ms. Anand has also got a piece of work in draft which documents this process, which I'll let her tell you a little bit about.
Through the chair, to the mayor. Yes, we do have a procedure actually that is in development, that is in development at the moment, and that actually it starts off with explaining the different types of events, who would investigate those events, and then that next level up. And so that will be able to provide anybody who has an event to actually understand the process, why we do what we do, and the information that we use, but also that elevation. And also we do have the critical incident policy, which describes that as well, especially for those critical events. Yeah. And so through this whole process, that's what we've realised when we've gone through and looked at the work that we're doing and the critical risks, looking and thinking, well, what's missing here? What do we need to provide as a process and system to support this work for our workers to understand it and be able to apply it?
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Just trying to understand at what level and at what urgency does it get reported to different levels. So critical incident procedure.
Yes, so we do have that.
You do that.
Yes, so we do have that.
And so through the chair, just as a reminder to the committee, that was developed a year ago off the back of the not related to work, but the fatality that we had at work, and that was the whole program of work that got developed following that. So that has all of the escalations in it with the who needs to know when something serious happens.
Good. And then I had another question, unrelated question, which was about lead indicators. And related to now we've got some historic information about reports of things to do with critical incidents and actually just reports. When I think about those critical risk areas, a lot of them are related to when lots more work happens by council contractors, which tends to be from now until April, whether it's fixing water leaks, doing capital work or doing roading work, which are all involved with the vehicles and the machinery. Is there a health and safety lead conversation that happens with a seasonal lens on it?
through the chair. So yes, I'm having regular meetings with our the performance development team and then transport. And so that's happening regularly to understand the work and to highlight any risks that are coming up, which is really good because it's like looking ahead, thinking, well, this is happening, this could be the weather. And also through the weekly stand-up meetings that our teams have here, is in those conversations identifying that work that is coming up and any potential risks. And we're doing the same thing within the contractor monthly meeting. And so that there is a space in that where we actually talk about what work is coming up and the hazards, and that's really good because the other contractors that are a part of that all might be working on the same project. So it's once again using that really collective collaborative approach.
Thank you. And I appreciated being at the supplier delivery excellence meeting last week and was part of the conversation with all the contractors in the room. And one of our major contractors, a long-time partner, stood and shared a pretty important health and safety moment for them about what they've done with the mental health and wellbeing of their staff over the winter time, which was pretty tough for them. And they did that in a really open and honest way that was really appreciated by the room. It was really powerful. So that was a great forum and awesome to have them share that like that. It was very cool.
Councillor Byrne.
That you've come a long way, and contractors, and we've got safety reps and obviously health and safety meetings. I'm just wondering, how do we engage with the general workers out there, the workers on the ground? How are they, how do we spread that health and safety message through the disseminates safety to the general work?
Through the chair, we do that in lots of different ways. So the health and safety reps, when they come to the health and safety meeting, they represent the workers. When they go back from the meeting, they represent health and safety committee back to the workers, and that's shared through their stand-up meetings that they have weekly. We also have the kōwhai tree on the wall, which we put up as another avenue for workers to be able to put ideas up or anything. It was an open forum where they anonymously put, things up, and the grab bags came as a result of that. And then all those ideas are brought to the committee. Also, we have our health and safety rep that actually leads the contractor monthly meeting. And we have other various workers on that, but also through our staff meetings, through weekly words. We're actually quite a collaborative council, and we're lucky because of our size and also the culture that we have in health and safety, that people are engaging, and hopefully we have still breaking down barriers for people to actually feel, to be able to report things, especially those, near misses and those safety observations. And having each other's backs, kia hamaru te ora, together we live safely. And that is a banner that I'm quite confident that staff are, they know we talk about it all the time. And it's that continuous talking of health and safety as a value, and promoting that good culture.
I just wanted to add something to that. Michelle, thank you. Just really keen for us to get out in the early mornings and stand up toolbox talks with the workers and talk about listen to what they're doing and what they're talking, what they're discussing, but also contributing to that as well. So really keen to get that culture going as well. Something I'll be doing personally, but something very keen for my leaders to be doing as well. And others.
So there is performance metrics, so you will build that into leadership.
We'll build it. Let's come and see it.
Couple of questions from myself. You've got injury and illness. I'm just going to dig into the illness bit. Is that mental health? What is illness?
Yeah. So illness is something, so if for an example of an illness would be leptospirosis, being exposed to biological hazards. An illness would also be if somebody had a medical event at work, as opposed to a physical injury, that would come up under that. So yeah, there are specific, no definitions for the illness versus the incident, which.
The other one, contractors incident frequency rate by man hours on page 42. You've got one here, it has quite high spikes in April and then again in September. And it goes from 0 to 5, down to 0 to 4, 3. And it's good. Is that a concern? Yeah. Or are they just not working on those months?
When we talk about the contractor incident rate, that covers property damage, and also any injury any event that happens with an outcome. It doesn't necessarily mean that the injury will actually, the incident will actually have an injury associated with it, as within those definitions. We have been monitoring that, and there is a piece of work that the portfolio manager is doing with that, those up and down spikes, and we have identified within that there was a trend, and there's been things that have been put around that and being monitored, and as we can see, it's come down again in October. And I have just got the November report through, and there was, it's of course come down again, but that there was a trend that was noticed amongst that, which has been picked up, and that's the beauty of being able, when we redefined our definitions, and redefined our data collection, we've been able to pick this up at a more, at a better level. So we are monitoring that and working with contractors when we see these trends.
And so through the chair, I'll just add to that as well that Mr. Kinvig, I think, spoke to the committee maybe in the last meeting about that. It wasn't in particular about the peak that we saw, but more the lack of events that we were seeing coming through from the contracting partners. And ahead of the last service delivery excellence meeting, we'd sent some comms out to all of the contractors saying, we're not sure we have confidence in the data. Do you have confidence in the data? Is this actually what's happening on the ground? And as Ms. Annan said, we've had a really good response to that from our contracting partners. So we're watching this too.
Mr. Gibbs.
Yes, just going back to an earlier conversation around wellness and do we have for our own people an EAP type service where they can reach out independently for support?
So through the chair, absolutely we do. We use a business called EAP Services, which is available to staff and is offered through multiple channels, whether it's through your manager or a peer, anyone from the committee, and in particular our people and capability team often use it when they see someone that needs it in particular.
And do you get any high level feedback about the amount of times it's been used, any trends that are coming out? Do you get feedback from the service provider?
So through the chair, there are two different ways which we use the service provider. One is where staff elect to use it, and that information is held confidential. The other way in which we can use that process is if we refer them with the staff's agreement, and then we might receive feedback back from the provider, assuming we have the permission of the staff member to do it. At a high level, we simply just see the amount of sessions that come through monthly that we pay for at council, but no, there's no trend information given because that would require the permission of the people that attend.
Yeah, we've got a similar service for other companies, and we do get high level trend information because we need to know, right? If our staff are feeling threatened or what have you, there's bullying going on or something, if we don't get some sort of indication coming back at a very high level. I have to admit, and we have to respect the privacy of everybody, but sometimes it can be an indicator that we've got something going on that we need to know about.
So through the chair, more often than not, I'm pretty comfortable because our people and capability team normally knows when someone is attending. And they normally know why, even if the person has elected to go there themselves. But yes, if we started to see more than one a month, two a month, then I think that would give me cause to want to know a bit more about the why. But at this point in time, the amount that come through monthly, that's pretty low levels, to be honest. But something I'd be happy to investigate in future if that was what the committee was interested in hearing about.
The fact you're monitoring, if it's only 1 or 2 a month and it shot up to 10, we'd know about it. You'd be on top of it.
Mhm.
Good. Okay. That's all I wanted to know.
Maybe through you, Situ, probably one of the things that's not in the report is the Mates for Life bit of work as well. So that's these two talk about it. And maybe talk about it, but again, that's kind of got another whole support network that's wrapped around it as well from a wellbeing perspective. So it's just another avenue that we've got trained facilitators in it now. I've personally done a couple of the courses, and they're actually really powerful, really strong things to just actually encourage just the right conversations and the right internal escalation. And just from experience from those, having sat through a couple of those things, had people already come to me to escalate stuff. So yeah, my sense is we're in a positive direction in terms of people in a comfortable space to raise things.
Yeah. Very good. Thank you.
Through the chair, I just, one thing that I think is really important and is a really good thing with council is the fact that we do we do aim to have a really good, robust, safe space and open door policy. And that's well received from what I hear amongst the organisation, and I can speak to that personally as well.
Thank you. Just a next steps question. So the governance charter is up for review, and it stipulates that every 2 years we will update the health and safety and wellbeing governance charter, the policy statement, the action plan, and the resource allocation. Where is that in our work program? It's on front of us. Coming up.
So through you, Chair, I can't answer exactly where it is in the work program, but Ms. Anand has been reminding me very politely that yes, they are due for review. And the charter in particular is the piece of work that she's been looking at the last couple of weeks. They will need to come through to the next Risk and Assurance Committee meeting. In terms of where they're at for review, if they're not in the work program, we can add them in as some line items to make sure they're not missed off the schedule. But Ms. Anand is very diligent in the timeframes. So I am confident that she knows when they're due. However, yes, let's give you some visibility of the when.
Good. I just conscious that the charter is signed by 3 people that no longer work here and haven't for some time. And so I think it would be good to refresh that. At least the charter part of it properly, because that's a relatively easy part.
Any questions? So the recommendation is that the Risk and Assurance Committee notes the health and safety report dated 1st of October to 3rd of November 2024. That's a burn. Worship. Say aye. Great. Insurance placement update 24-25, Mr. Chamberlain.
Good morning again. So you'll recall that our main insurance policies were due for renewal on the 1st of November. And at the last meeting, I brought to you some updates. At that point, the policies and the premiums hadn't been confirmed. We had some indicative numbers, but this morning I can confirm what the real numbers are. So essentially what's happened is This year has been a better year for insurance. The cover that Aon have been able to buy for us has been returning to the market. The pricing generally has got a little bit softer with more competition. So Aon approached myself early in the piece and said that it could be an appropriate year for us to consider looking at our loss limits. So this is the maximum amount that the insurer will need to pay out in a catastrophic event. They had been sitting at 30 million for quite some time. And with the inflation that we've experienced in the last couple of years, particularly in the construction sector, the percentage of our assets that 30 million would cover has reduced quite significantly. So without any sort of new updated loss modelling, I inflated that number based on the construction inflation and came up with a figure of 50 million and asked them to provide some premiums to give me an indicative price of what that would do to my overall premium. And I was pleasantly surprised when the quotes came back with and without. Essentially, what we paid last year in premium, I could pay a similar amount this year and get that much increased level of insurance. And you'll see there on page 45, there's a list of all the different premiums. So for example, our infrastructure insurance decreased in premium. We had a slight increase in our above ground stuff. The biggest change is our liability insurance. Again, this was signaled to you back in June. If you recall, we had our liability insurances with a different broker. And in May this year, they announced that they were pulling out of the market, which left the market in a distressed position. And unfortunately for that particular policy, and in our distressed position, along with 11 other councils, we had to go cap in hand to the market and got hit with a 31% premium increase on that. Further to what the paper talks about, this week on Tuesday, I had a meeting with Aon and the other councils that make up the Hawke's Bay, Wanganui, Manawatu buying group. And we're in the process of getting some updated loss modelling done. They are hoping that that will be complete by June next year to allow us to review that $50 million figure that I picked this year to make sure that that is actually the right figure. And since we did the loss modelling last, GNS has updated their science. And so the loss modelling that we'll do early in 2025 will include the latest loss modelling for earthquakes, and will include the Hikanui Trench science that has evolved over the past few years. That's where insurance is at.
Questions, Julie?
Thank you. Some good news, I suppose. The other action that came out of that insurance review that we did was about doing a piece of work on a risk financing strategy.
Correct.
Where does that sit in the work program? Sorry, that's the second item in a row I've talked about the work program.
Yeah. So through you, your chair, essentially before we can undertake that piece of work, we need to have the loss modelling information, because that feeds into how much money this council needs to set aside out of its debt cap to react to a catastrophic event. So the intention is to pick that up after June, once we've had that loss modelling information come through.
June, okay, that's good. Do you think we could make sure that actually comes up into the committee program and the health and safety ones, because they're not currently documented in their work review
In terms of detail.
in terms of the fact that it's work that the committee wants to and needs to do. So they're not health and safety policies and that risk management, risk financing policy.
The insurance is. I believe I'm in 14 actions that sit underneath it anyway, in terms of the whole strategy components. We're throwing back on the. September. August. So we'll try and just break this down.
Sorry?
It's 11 actions inside the insurance strategy.
Yeah, well, we didn't see the whole insurance strategy. We saw a PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah, we, in the paper we presented, there were 11 actions.
Oh, right, okay.
Mr. Timmer.
Yeah, just a question. Just reading this, it just seems a little haphazard and you've done a great job by increasing it from 30 to 50 for the underground stuff. It just seems a little haphazard in that we had an old maximum probable loss calculation and we haven't done anything about it for some time. We had an opportunity to increase our cover because the rates were lower, so we did it. And then we go back and say, well, we would do a maximum probable loss calculation now to check that 50 is actually right. Could be too much or could not be enough. And it just seems haphazard. And I know that you're not that kind of person, but it just comes across when I read it this way.
Yeah.
And it probably comes around because of the maximum probable loss calculation. And I know it's an expensive exercise. And it talks to the point about the insurance strategy that we should have in the strategy that we're going to do one of these things, that we're going to do them on a regular basis. I know they're expensive, but we should have a bit more of a better process around it. I just feel it's a little bit, we've sort of driven by maybe what Aon wants to do, and it's more about what we want to do, isn't it? Yeah. So I just want to get your comments on it. And I know you're doing it. It's great what we're doing. Don't keep not criticizing. It just looks that way.
Yeah. So I would need to check my facts, but I believe the last loss modelling was done in 2020, 2021. And again, it was led by Aon. So they, again, we were heading into tighter markets. We're coming off the back of Kaikoura and Christchurch, and so to try and keep our premiums to a level that were manageable, Aon suggested that we do some loss modelling to limit the exposure to keep our premiums down. It hasn't been done since then. And the GNS Science released a report 2022, I believe the data came out, which means that our loss modelling is now out of date, as well as being impacted by the construction costs. So it wasn't until the premiums for this year started, so that they went to London and started talking to the underwriters and realised that the premiums that they were likely to get were lower, that the brokers came back to us and said, well, we've got an opportunity here. But we don't have enough time to redo all the loss modelling. Do you wish to adjust your loss modelling based on your understanding of inflation and your assets? But we will come back and do the loss modelling before the next premium round, buying us the 6 months that we need to undertake this work. So that was sort of the process. So yes, it was a little bit of a last minute suggestion and decision. But I do think while 50 million might not be the most accurate number, it's probably a lot closer than 30 million, which is what our old limit was.
Yeah, I just think that I know Aon sort of do what they do when they want to, and I'm just wondering if they're doing it correctly. You know, like there's quite a big gap there. GNS come out and make some changes, and they can be quite significant. And not to mention the fact in the meantime you got roaring away, you know, construction costs, and you've also got the financial pressure because you don't want to put your insurance up because you've got your budget to contend with. So you've got these sort of, you know, bit of cognitive dissonance about it because you don't want to look at it, but you really sort of do, if you know what I mean. So that's what I'm concerned about, that we are in a position that we're underinsured and we don't really haven't got a really good grip on it.
So again, one of the comments that came out when Jim Palmer did the review was that our loss modelling was getting a little bit out of date. We should be looking at it. Around the same time, Aon approached us and said that pretty much the same thing. And by doing it as a group, there's a significant saving to doing it as an individual council. So it seemed to be the path of least resistance and most cost effective for council to be part of the Aon group.
Maybe just a comment through you, Mr. Chair. I think probably to your point, Tim, it's really speaking to what I think this committee, in particular over the last 4 or 5 years now, has been talking about in terms of wanting to lift its insurance maturity in terms of good decision making, making sure there's appropriate levels of coverage. Yeah, are we making the right investments? Are the trade-offs appropriate? And that's really what the foundations of those 11 actions or 11 actions that are sitting inside the August report that we brought through, and then the subsequent work that Mr. Palmer supported us with. So yeah, really trying to again lift that maturity, and just probably just you've picked up on it. To be fair, the timeframes that we get from the insurers are pretty clunky at the times the decision, and the turnarounds are at times a 2 or 3 day turnaround of do you want to confirm the placement or not. So it's those windows don't help us either in terms of the market conditions this last couple of years. So,
but the maximum probable loss calculation is something that we can do
in advance.
We have control over that. We have a bit of an independence. We can get that done. We can push Aon to do it. And I understand where Aon come from. You know, they go to the markets and stuff, and they really have to have a quick decision, and that's just the nature of the game. And we just have to abide by that. But
and again, probably coming back, what the strategy is trying to do is lift that maturity to make sure that we are best placed to have the right informed decisions, that we're putting our best foot forward, that we're making prudent and appropriate investment in terms of the insurance placements we are taking. So we've got to continue to really focus and
I look forward to seeing the calculations in June. I'm sure your calculations probably bang on. Who knows?
It's hoping.
I do think so there's this evolution of maturity on how to become proactive in this risk litigation space when it comes to insurance.
Yeah.
And so we've been taking that, and what I get quite conscious of is that this insurance renewal comes around every year with the same conversation. So the bit about the risk financing strategy and the clarity on that before we get through to the 2025 renewals is really important, because what happens is the year turns around and we haven't done that foundational piece of work yet. So we've got to make sure we get that in so we can turn that process back to being proactive again rather than just reactive. There's this critical policy piece that we've got to get right too.
Yep. And just in this instance, with the premiums going where they've gone, this is an opportunity to go for 2 years or to try to get a 2 or 3 year deal out of the insurers. I don't know if Aon investigated. I suspect they may or may not have, but these are the kind of things where you can lock it in, and then we can make sure that what we've got in our budget and the LTP is at least going to be covered for the next 3 years, and we know for sure what it's going to be.
Mr. Gibbs.
Yeah, I think Michael's just answered or asked the first question I had was around why we're thinking on a 1 year cycle. Could be thinking 2 or 3 years. So you pretty much addressed that. The other little question I had was just around the loss modelling. You say Aon does that. Do we own the model afterwards, Brent, or does they own the model? And how flexible is it if we wanted to change brokers? Can we take the model with us, or do the new brokers start again?
Good question. I know we get a written report out of the end of this, or at least that's what we got last time. The actual underlying model, I believe, is in a proprietary piece of software. So I'm not sure that Aon would be willing to release that, but we can certainly ask if that's of interest.
Yeah, it just goes back to whether we, as time we review our service provider around this as well, just whether there's a cost of changing because we have to reformat the models or start from scratch with the new broker.
Just on that end,
Answer that is.
I know when I was doing this, there used to be a couple of providers for maximum profit loss calculation in the market, and I think you'll find now that there's only Aon that does it, and it's a bit annoying. I personally have a problem with it because they have a conflict of interest. They're providing the advice to what cover you should have and providing the insurance, and I have an inherent problem with that. So there was a guy called David Hopkin that used to do it. I used him myself on many occasions, and he was quite good. But I don't know if there's other providers in the market, but it's always good to try different people because there's a lot of subjectivity in these things and there's no real right answer. The only real right answer is when you have an event and you find out afterwards whether it was right or not. That's probably a bit late.
It's probably just noting, Mr. Chair, that it's not, the loss modelling is not just council going alone, it's part of what is the, what is it, kind of Manawatu Wanganui less Hawke's Bay as well, so just being mindful of how much we can influence if we want to go.
Yeah, but it's still good to know the answer to those questions. So, and the answer might be we're stuck. You know. Thank you.
So I just threw you, Mr. Chair, made a note that this March meeting will run in the work program, just making a little bit more detail in terms of where things are at. Because really, if things aren't rolling well in March, by the time we get to September, we'll be through rolling. So hopefully there's a good cover in that first meeting.
The recommendations that the Risk and Insurance Committee notes the insurance placement update 2024 and 2025 report. Councillor Byrne and myself, all in favour say aye.
Aye.
Next report is 23-24 annual report follow-up items. Mr. Chamberlain again.
So at the last risk and insurance meeting, we had Ernst Young here to tell us how the audit process was going. And I presented a draft copy of the annual report at that time. I'm pleased to say that the annual report audit has now all been concluded and the annual report is on our website and available for everyone to see. At the last risk and insurance meeting, there were a few questions that were asked that I said we would go away and do some research on and come back. So that's the purpose of this report today. One of the questions was around bad debts and what level of bad debts council has been experiencing. So I can confirm that this morning. So council last year in the annual report had a turnover of 75.5 million. And across that, you can see the breakdown there on page 47. So the breakdown between rates, subsidies, fees, development contributions and other. Each revenue stream has a slightly different bad debt profile. So just to remind you, rates are essentially secured under the Rating Act against the property titles themselves. So they hold a similar sort of security to mortgages. So the rate debts, the loss on bad debts through rates is fairly low. Subsidies and grants are largely paid by central government. So again, fairly low in terms of bad debts, given that we're all government department. Development contributions, this is where we levy developers for their share of infrastructure upgrades. These are secured by the ability for council to actually withhold consent or withhold certificate of compliance. So again, we do have instances where some of the developers go bankrupt, but generally the collection on those is pretty good as well. The area that we have the biggest issue is in fees and charges, because these are unsecured and are just subject to normal collection processes. There's a table there on page 48, which sets out what we provided as bad debts or bad debt provision at the end of the financial year. So you can see that we provided last year 121,000. And this collection profile that you see there on page 48 is based on the actuals that we've had over the past couple of years and based on the aging of that debt. So it's a mathematical formula that calculates the probable loss based on history. Actual bad debts written off in 23-24 was 99,000, which meant that 98.7% of our invoices were collected. So most of those bad debts that we ended up writing off were actually to do with water and the water remissions for leaks. So again, comfortable with how that's tracking. So any questions on bad debts? If not, I'll move on to
Really good explanation.
Funding of depreciation. So we talked about how this council doesn't fully fund depreciation at the last meeting. So depreciation for the non-accountants is the mathematical formula that accountants use to recognise the wearing out of assets. So for example, a computer typically has a life expectancy of 3 years. So over the 3 years, you would write off a third each year to basically say that the computer is worth $2,000 today, but by year 3, it's not worth anything because it's obsolete and out of date. In a perfect world, councils would rate for that depreciation, and every year as it sets aside its depreciation, it would set aside a little bit of money, and as those assets wear out, you would have a reserve at the end of it that you could then use to acquire the replacement asset. For this to work, you obviously have to do that every year, and you have to do it from the year that you purchased the asset. And historically, like most councils around New Zealand, we haven't been doing that well. And that means that when we come to replace things like reservoirs that we're facing at the moment, we don't have the $20–30 million sitting in the bank waiting for that replacement. What we tend to do instead is use loans. And this is, there's a rationale behind that. So again, if we think of collecting depreciation throughout the life, you're having the current ratepayer pay for the replacement of a reservoir that will then have a 50-year life expectancy. Whereas if you have a loan, you are making the loan repayments over the 50 years and you're having the ratepayer that is using that reservoir pay for the replacement. So that's the approach that this council has taken. I've given you some fizzes there and drawn all over them and highlighted different bits, but essentially what I want to highlight is that in the current the financial year that we were auditing, that council spent 30 million on asset replacements. It had a rating surplus of 7.1 million. So obviously what that meant was that we spent a lot more on asset replacements than what we had in rating surpluses. So the balance was actually funded through the use of reserves, some government subsidies. So for example, the roading component of our asset replacements is heavily subsidised by NZTA. And we also utilised developer contributions and we drew some additional debt. Over the page, you'll see another highlighted number, which is our depreciation for the year. So our assets notionally wore out by $15 million during the year. So again, you would argue, well, actually, if you've got a rating surplus of 7 million, that's not enough to fund your depreciation. However, again, I would remind you that some of our replacements is funded by government subsidies. But if we were to take that into account and take into account our rating surpluses to get the additional amount of rating surplus that we would have needed to basically cover our depreciation, we would have had to have collected 5.8% more in rates than what we did. So that's depreciation and rating.
Clearly unpalatable, but has the council, and it's a historic question, so it's going to change where we are now, but have we ever fully funded depreciation?
Not in my time
Oh,
here.
no, definitely. Like, I mean, historically, has,
Yeah, I would,
No, I've seen no evidence.
yeah. I would be surprised because historically councils have always wanted to keep rates low, and when you've got a 50-year to worry about an asset replacement, you worry about it later. The trouble that this council has got is that the later has arrived.
it's not like our forefathers started doing something and then. No.
We certainly don't have,
Yeah, okay.
we certainly don't have any reserves that would indicate that that was being done in previous years. The exception is motor vehicles, where we do fully depreciate and fund replacement reserve, but every other asset class, the answer would be no.
There hasn't been a step change.
Pretty much some councils choose to do, we depreciate on just new assets, new capital assets. So if they're building, say, libraries or something of that ilk, they choose to fully depreciate that. But like ultimately it comes back to an affordability position of can we actually afford to do that, and is that a priority? So some kind of key fundamental policy decisions.
Well, I think it's something we're going to have to come back to, depending on where the local work done well decision on CCOs gets to, because the big issue we've got on the funding of depreciation is on Three Waters assets. And if that's no longer directly in this business mix, we've got an opportunity to reset the dial, I think. So that's going to be an important moment of time for the balance of the business once we get to it.
Mr. Gibbs.
Yes, I think the mayor just stole my point. I think you're right. If we can get the water assets out, we can then reflect on this again. And the other thing, of course, is depreciation, and the conversation Brent had doesn't cover growth. Right, it largely recovers replacement of existing. And if we have an expectation of the region growing and we have to plan for infrastructural growth, that's another piece of the jigsaw puzzle as well we need to put into the cash flow mix.
Well, we've taken a policy position of DCs, which is kind of, it's almost retrospective. It's not really retrospective in how it's put together, but we don't have enough collected for DCs to front foot that. It's always collecting it in hindsight.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brent.
Thanks, Brent.
The recommendation that the Risk and Assurance Committee notes the annual report follow-up items report. We're going to second so again, everybody say aye.
Right.
Thanks, carried. Date of the next meeting, 12th of March.
Sorry.
Thanks much.
So just for you, Mr. Chair, we've it's noted as the 5th of March in the report. Just had some feedback when we put the dates out that just availability of Mr. Gibbs and Mr. Timmer doesn't work for the 5th. So it will be one of the things we discussed tomorrow. So the 12th, we're proposing to change that date to 12th, which everybody else's diaries looks pretty good at the moment.
Well, yeah, thanks for being cooperative. It's pretty great. And also the later starting time of the meeting will help me significantly. I mean, I could travel on the same day.
And just probably a discussion for the committee as well.
Okay, so the next meeting for the Risk and Assurance Committee meeting to be held on the 12th of March, not the 5th of March, 2025. So that is moving a second for that. Michelle. All in favour, say aye. Carried. That brings us to the end of the public meeting of risk insurance. We're about to have morning tea, so. So we just need to have a mover and a second to move into public excluded.
May as well do-
First.
Sorry.
Yeah, we'll do the workshop first. Okay. So, thank you very much for those watching, and we were going to have morning tea now. And we'll be back for public workshop at 10:40, make that 10:45.